Tom Pelissero, have you been deemed mission critical for tomorrow's NFL Network release? Have you signed a document? Are you mission critical, Tom? Are you?
This is the first time, Rich, that I've heard we have a scheduled release show. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be you guiding this thing, and I will be sitting back like everybody else, refreshing NFL.com until the whole thing comes up.
Very good. So let's just jump into the Jared Goff signing. What do you say to people who think that this is a wildly expensive contract for his services in Detroit, Tom?
Well, Jared Goff's was entering the final year of his contract. So this is the natural time when, if you're going to commit to a quarterback, you're going to want to do it in advance. Otherwise, you go down a Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott path where either the guy leaves or it becomes much, much more expensive to get something done later. So when you're Brad Holmes and you go all the way back to LA when the Rams drafted him, #1 overall back in 2016, and then, of course, gets the reunion via the Matthew Stafford trade. At the time, Goff, it was just, that's the throw in. Because it was a cash dump and a cap dump for the Rams to offload Jared Goff's guaranteed money. But Brad Holmes was very consistent all along, saying, we believe this is a guy who is more than just a bridge quarterback. So this contract that Goff had been on, which at the time was this albatross that the Rams needed to get off their books, has actually been very affordable relative to the level at which Jared Goff has played in recent years here. We can all debate, whether you should come in second or eighth or 10th. The bottom line is every top quarterback contract now, Rich, is going to get done at $50 million plus. It is a huge number to swallow. But as we saw with Cousins this past year, even if there's only one team that's really bidding for your services against your existing team, that team might be desperate enough to go someplace that the other team wasn't willing to go. So the Lions had three priorities in the offseason: get Sewell done, get Amon-Ra St. Brown done, get Jared Goff done. They have checked off all those boxes and now turn their attention back to trying to get over the hump and get to a Super Bowl in 2024.
So what percentage of the salary cap is a market value quarterback going to take up? What's the numbers? What's the math here, Tom?
It's a shade over 20% right now on a $243 million cap, which, to put that in perspective, so you go back just 9 years ago, 2015, Aaron Rodgers was in the third year of a 3-year reign as the highest paid player in the NFL at $22 million per year. The cap at that point was about $100 million less. So you were talking about a little over 15% of the salary cap. So, why are we now at 20%, which in percentage terms doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about a percentage of a close to $250 million cap, that's a huge chunk. Part of it's, remember, we had that COVID dip, not in 2020, but in 2021 when they had to, in essence, the players had to pay back this low interest loan that the owners had given them to get full checks in 2020. So you had a blip. This is the first year that the cap is kind of getting back to the trajectory that we think it's going to be on. That's one more reason that the forward-thinking teams have been willing to say, you know what, let's pay this number now, because the next group, from Jordan Love to Tua to Trevor Lawrence to whenever the next guys are coming up again, they're all going to want to outshoot this year. This contract could end up looking a lot better, kind of like the Deshaun Watson contract that everyone said, for a variety of reasons, of course. $46 million per year, fully guaranteed for 5 years. It's a huge, huge contract. He's barely in the top 10 at this point. So, yes, it is a sizable chunk of the salary cap. You put more on the quarterbacks back when he becomes one of your highest paid players. Jared Goff certainly fits in that category now for the Lions. We'll see the final accounting of this, Rich, because there's an option year in 2028. The actual average is going to be lower, but it's still going to be in that $50 million per year range. The only question now is who becomes the first $60 million per year quarterback. And I can think of a handful of guys right now who might be thinking about that as a pretty good target number.
All right. Answer the question, Tom. Who is going to be the first $60 million quarterback in the NFL?
It's a great question, because the ones that are up right now, you can look at and say, they're going to be the next ones to get paid. It is Jordan Love, who is eligible. He did the 1-year kind of bridge contract last year to take the place of the 5th-year option, because he hadn't really started for the Packers at that point. So he now is a guy that they're going to extend. That one's going to be somewhere in the 50s. I don't know that it gets to 60 just based upon the timeline here. Tua Tagovailoa is somebody who has acknowledged publicly that there have been contract talks. hasn't been around the Dolphins so far in the course of the spring. We'll see as we get out the next week or two here whether he's out there for OTAs, but he's another one who, if you're talking about the aiming point, that's going to be $50 million plus. A lot of layers to that, of course, with the medical history, with the concussions, but he did stay healthy for all of last season. He's played at a really high level under Mike McDaniel, particularly when he's had his full complement of weapons, which wasn't really the case down the stretch for Miami. I think Trevor Lawrence is a complicated type of a calculation in terms of, have you seen the consistency at this point to say Trevor Lawrence deserves to be paid at the top of the market? But realistically, there's no real reason for Trevor Lawrence to rush and take a contract below $50 million per year. So that one's probably going to have a 5 in front of it as well. And then you got Dak, who is headed right now toward becoming an unrestricted free agent next March. Jerry Jones continues to say we want Dak to be the quarterback. His actions would indicate otherwise in terms of, at minimum, they want to buy time and see how the season goes on everybody, on Mike McCarthy, who's in the final year of his deal, on Dak, who's in the final year of his contract right now. If that deal gets done next March, or even if Dak plays at a high level this season and then walks, that could end up being the first $60 million per year guy. You got to wait 3 years to get your contract. So we can all talk about, CJ Stroud and guys like that. Realistically, Stroud, they can't pay him for at least the next couple of years here. Maybe that's the name. If it's not Dak, Stroud could end up being the guy, just because the timeline when he becomes eligible for a new contract is about 20 months from right now. If he continues to play at this level, that could end up being the one who, just based upon where the cap is going, could be the one that gets over that $60 million ceiling.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. So why wait to sign Dak? Really, they really are wondering if he has another terrific season and then a playoff disappointment, right? They truly will just let him walk and just start from scratch again. I mean, certainly when we're already talking about how next year's quarterback class really isn't lighting things up based on what we saw this year. I mean, and then you got Justin Jefferson's going to get his bag soon at some point. Don't you want to beat the Vikings to that punch if you're Jerry for CeeDee Lamb? Honestly, like I'm just head scratching over this. It's not my money, and obviously he's an incredibly successful man. But I'm wondering what's up, man.
Micah Parsons is eligible for a new contract right now, too. And if you play this out for another year or two, and Micah continues to be Micah and is a perennial 14, 15 sack guy, that's going to be an off the charts. That could be a $40 million per year edge rusher in a couple of years. I think the question is not, why are the Cowboys waiting to pay Dak? The question that I think is fair to raise is just, why are the Cowboys waiting to do everything? Look, how many of their core free agents walked in the offseason? Tyler Biadasz, their center. You don't talk about that because it's not one of the top 10 things to talk about with the Cowboys, but that's your center, and he ends up going to a division rival for a lot more money than the Cowboys were willing to pay. Tyron Smith, it got toward the end. It was obvious they weren't going to pay him. He ends up walking. Tony Pollard ends up walking. 2 of your edge rushers walked to Washington as well. You could have potentially had more flexibility. You would have had more flexibility if you proactively tried to get something done with Dak, but by all indications, there was no effort, no real even conversation about extending Dak prior to the start of free agency in March, just like things have not advanced on a CeeDee Lamb front or have gotten started yet with Micah Parsons. And Mike McCarthy, I mean, how many times, I understand what happened in the playoff game last year, but how many times does a coach who has 3 consecutive 12-win seasons go into a contract year? And by the way, a bunch of his assistant coaches also in contract years, and they were trying to hire a defensive coordinator in a contract year. There's all these types of different things happening here that all indicate that Jerry, whether this is intention or not, the message sent by the actions is, we are in a decision type of year. We're going to see what happens in 2024, and if we have to reboot the entire thing, we'll reboot the entire thing. I know how the coaching staff, Rich, feels about Dak Prescott in that building. He is the hardest worker. He is the guy that everybody rallies around. They love him as a person, all those things. He's played last year with Mike McCarthy calling the plays. That was Dak's best season. They have a playoff flop. It is bad the entire game against the Packers team that, by the way, took San Francisco to the wire the following week. It just feels like Jerry doesn't want to put any money out the door here. He's keeping all options on the table. Do I think that Dak ends up back in Dallas. I think that the closer you get to the start of the season, if there's not movement on the contract front, the harder it becomes to envision Dak being the Cowboys quarterback in 2025 and not finding a payday elsewhere, just like Kirk Cousins did.
So out of the highly paid quarterbacks in the NFL, who's the best bargain? What do you think, Tom? You pour over all these numbers. You sent me a document today that honestly looked like it came from NASA. So you look over these spreadsheets. I think I may have asked you, like, is this a science test? I think I texted you back when you texted me these documents. So you've seen them all. Who's the best bargain at quarterback in the NFL in your estimation?
That was my fault on that, Rich. I sent you the PDF, which was the fastest thing that I could pull up. And
oh my
it started with Patrick Mahomes.
I was told there'd be no math on this test, man. Jeez. Wow.
The Mahomes contract also happens to be the most complicated contract I think any of us have ever seen. I remember when that one first got done several years ago, putting together a spreadsheet just so I could figure out, okay, this vests at this date. Now this one vests a year later. But he signed a very long contract. I mean, the easy answer to what's the best value in sports or the best bargain on the quarterbacks, it's easily Patrick Mahomes, because he signed what effectively was a 12-year deal. It was a 10-year, $450 million extension that paid him $60 million roughly over the first 3 years of the contract. To put that in perspective, Kirk Cousins this year, at a time that the Falcons have already drafted a successor a month after signing him, is making $67 million in 2024. So for Mahomes, and from his perspective, the goal, and you would say that he's accomplished this, was keep the core parts around him, give a ton of flexibility for the team. Everything is these rolling guarantees where they vest a year early, and the Chiefs have moved money around the past couple of years here, make sure that he continues to get paid along the lines of the top quarterbacks in the market. But for Mahomes, the focus was, how do I keep the team together, which, absent the Tyreek Hill trade, they more or less have done through the course of time, bringing back Chris Jones, bringing back Travis Kelce. And it was also, I want to win a lot of championships, which then is going to open up all kinds of other revenue-driving types of opportunities for me. So at this point, Mahomes has won several Super Bowls. He's won MVPs. He's in literally, I think, every commercial on TV. And he has ascended beyond that, which I think leads to one of the great conversations. I talked with an agent who represents some of the top quarterbacks about this leading up to the draft. We were talking about some of the various quarterback contract situations playing out around the league. There have been quarterbacks through the course of time. This is not everybody, but certainly some quarterbacks get to a certain point and tell their agents enough. In other words, it doesn't matter if I'm making 40 or 45. I'm making more money than I would ever know what to do with. And I want to win. And I don't want to take this down to the wire. And I don't want to go year to year. And I don't want to get into a franchise tag situation. Just, this is where I want to be. I'm getting boatloads of money. Enough. Drew Brees is one example of that through the course of time, where he would regularly tell his agent, Tom Condon, like, I'm good. Like, I got this. We're making a lot of money. We're fine. There's other quarterbacks who go about it a different type of way. And that's not to knock them or to say they're selfish or anything else. We cover the same game, Rich. These guys take an unbelievable pounding. Yeah, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, they're in a headbutt situation, 70 snaps a game. But even the quarterbacks, you're putting your body on the line. You suffer severe injuries. Dak suffered a very severe injury while playing on the franchise tag. But if you're willing to see it through, the way that you push the market beyond where it otherwise might be is you do what Kirk Cousins did and play out a couple of franchise tags, or you do what Dak did and play out your contract and play out a franchise tag and go right to the wire of a second tag that the Cowboys ended up having to apply to buy themselves time for the contract to be executed. The point is, there's nothing wrong with either one of those types of perspectives here. But at some point, to go back to the original question about the top quarterback numbers and the Jared Goff contract and how that fits in as a percentage of the salary cap, the thing to always keep in mind here is you have to balance that. Can we actually put a team around the guy? Teams have to balance that, but quarterbacks have to balance that on some level as well. So again, that's not to say that Dak's doing this in the wrong way or Kirk did it in the wrong way. If you want to absolutely maximize your value in terms of the contract number, the best way to do that is to get as close to free agency or into free agency. For other guys, they take the best offer that's there. You know, we see every year there's some of these big contracts that get done. Would Lamar Jackson have gotten a substantively less contract a year earlier if he hadn't played out 2 years at the end of his rookie contract that if he had an agent, that agent would have said, there's no way you should go out there and play for $3 million as a former MVP? Probably not. It wasn't that much better of a contract. He ended up getting a really strong deal. At some point, the player has to communicate with the agent and say, this is good enough. This is enough. This is where I want to be. And we'll see, with some of these other situations, exactly if and when that point is reached.
Fascinating, man. I mean, just absolutely fascinating. And so, I guess if we're talking bargains, Mahomes is bargain, obviously, 46 and change at APY for an average per year. But the biggest bargain at quarterback in the NFL is a rookie contract and a kid doing what, say, C.J. Stroud did last year and what we expect of him now. Or Jordan Love last year, right? Even though he signed a contract as a one-year extension. And when you take a look at the numbers of the APY again, because, again, I appreciate you providing me these numbers so our crack staff could put this together. You take a look at the 50 million APY club here in Burrow, Goff, Herbert, Jackson, and Hurts. And Hurts was a bargain too, right? Where he took the Eagles to the Super Bowl on a second round draft choice contract. Then you take a look at 6 through 10, and there's Mahomes sitting there at 46.3 million, and Murray, Watson, and Allen at the end. And then we land on Cousins, you said is going to make 60-something million bucks this year from Atlanta, which leads me to believe, just a long wind-up for this pitch, the Goff contract and the conversation we're having that it engenders, it just scratches my head again that the Falcons would go ahead and draft Michael Penix Jr. and take a year of this moment of his career and say, we're going to have you learn from Cousins. And I understand that that kids are going to sit and rest, and the Patriots are willing to potentially do this with May and let him sit, and the Vikings with J.J. McCarthy as well. But to have somebody so expensive on their roster and Cousins, and then take a year of somebody's rookie contract and say, you sit. It makes it, to this point, makes no sense at all still. And I'm wondering, now that we're a few weeks away, what you're hearing about and what you're thinking on this subject matter. Tom.
I have talked to a lot of coaches and front office members in the couple of weeks since the draft. And every time that draft pick comes up with Michael Penix going to Atlanta number 8, everybody says to a man, to a person, yeah, we were all shocked in the draft room. Every team was shocked in the draft room. And that was despite there were breadcrumbs indicating maybe this was possible and they'd gone and done a private workout. All that stuff, it felt like a smokescreen. It felt like the Falcons wanted somebody to trade up into that spot and take Michael Penix so they wouldn't have to. And they had conversations about trading down from that pick. In the end, it takes somebody to be willing to give up what you think is fair value for that pick and come up. The Falcons didn't get it. So they stood in and took Penix. I talked about this, Rich, when I was out there. What's up to the fellas in the studio, by the way? Miss you guys already.
Tommy,
when I was out there,
It's too late. It's too
talking
late.
about, this situation here. It's not that drafting the successor is a bad idea. It's that there's no precedent for signing a quarterback to the type of contract that the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins to, and then drafting the successor a couple months later. This is not Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. This is Aaron Rodgers on the Jets if the Jets had used their top pick last year to go and take a QB. You wouldn't do it. The NFL is a asset allocation, resource allocation league. There's all these people who say, oh, the cap's a myth. Every year we see that busted because teams have to make difficult decisions. Sometimes they have to reset and move on from a bunch of veterans because you just don't want to carry that year to year, rolling things over, rolling future dead cap. It's every dollar you spend hits the cap eventually. And so when you're trying to think about, okay, how does this play out here with Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix? Let's go year by year. Okay, let's assume nothing at this point, but let's assume Kirk Cousins plays the season for the Falcons. He makes $67 million. At that point, at the end of the season, let's say Cousins has played well, but you've seen enough of Michael Penix in practice. You decide, you know what? We're all ready to pull the plug right now and to move on to the Michael Penix era. Kirk Cousins in 2025 has a very palatable number. I believe he's owed $23 million, fully guaranteed. He's got another $10 million guaranteed in 2026 that becomes fully guaranteed at the start of 2025. So effectively, that contract only has $37 million practically guaranteed left into the future here. You could absolutely, unless Kirk Cousins plays terribly, which I don't expect, you could absolutely trade that with Kirk Cousins. But then you're taking a mountain of dead money and you paid Cousins $67 million to play 1 year for you. You're moving on from the rest of the guaranteed money, but there still would be, cap consequences because of the prorated portions of the signing bonus. You'd eat all that in 2025, so that would take up a lump on your cap. So really, it's a 2-year cap impact of Kirk Cousins before you move on to Michael Penix. The cap number is lower this year because of the signing bonus. If you go with Kirk Cousins for a second year, now you've paid him $90 million over 2 years. You still can move him in 2026, but the number is a lot higher at that point. And now you're 2 years into a Michael Penix contract. Oh, yeah, by the way, Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause, so he can effectively scuttle any deal that you could agree to and say, I'll only be traded to this one team. If you want to move on from me and go to the other guy, that's fine, but I want to go here. And your leverage in a trade then drops off. You've got drama into the offseason. It's very, very complicated. And I can only believe that Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot discussed this exact scenario prior to the draft, and they were comfortable that, hey, it's going to create dynamics in the locker room. It's going to create dynamics in the stadium, in the fan base, in the media, with the salary cap, and with cash. You would hope Arthur Blank, the owner who wrote that check and $67 million, put $90 million into escrow for Kirk Cousins, you would hope that he's completely on board with everything as well here, because there's no easy out. I guess that's the short answer to the question, Rich, is there's no easy way out on this with Kirk Cousins. Yes, you could trade him next year, but Cousins would have to go to a place that he wants to go to, and you will have already cut him a sizable check, a lot of money that you've invested in Kirk Cousins just to transition a year later to the next guy.
Wow. Before I let you go, if you got a couple of minutes here, is the story Connor Hughes of SNY was reporting out of New York. Are the Jets trying to mess with the offensive flow chart here to get somebody above Hackett and be the play caller in a way? It's really Rodgers' offense, if healthy. Did the Jets try to do something on the offensive side of the ball, coaching-wise? Tom, did that happen?
The Jets had a lot of conversations after the season. They moved on from several of the position coaches, including the quarterbacks coach, the running backs coach. This really, honestly, all goes back, Rich, to Robert Saleh's initial staff. Greg Knapp was going to be a senior assistant, tragically was killed he was on a bike and was hit by somebody who was texting and driving, which was just gutting, of course, on a personal level to all the people around the league who knew Greg Knapp. It also left them without the guy who was going to be the buffer and really help Shaq Wilson at the time on that coaching staff. She had a very young, bright quarterbacks coach, Rob Calabrese, but he wasn't supposed to be the primary quarterbacks coach. So ever since then, they've kind of been trying to find the right combination of pieces here. I know this. There was no way Aaron Rodgers was going to let Nathaniel Hackett not be a core part of the staff. There was no way that the primary conduit to Aaron Rodgers was not going to be Nathaniel Hackett on that staff. Again, there were a lot of things that they considered in terms of just cutting back, scaling back on certain things staff-wise. They did make a ton of changes on the offensive side of the ball. But in terms of Hackett being out or not being the OC, again, they may have added in different places. That all depends upon who's available here. But Aaron Rodgers is going to be running this offense. The offense they designed for him last year with Hackett was the Aaron Rodgers offense. This is not in any way disputing Connor Hughes' reporting.
Yes.
I wouldn't say that I've been told that exact thing. I would just say they did make a lot of changes on that staff last year. Hackett and Rodgers, this is two peas in a pod. And with hopefully more than 4 snaps Monday night in September against San Francisco, we'll see the real Aaron Rodgers Jets Hackett offense.
Tom, you're the man. Thanks for the time. Truly appreciate it. Love it. Tom Pelissero making us smarter. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.